classroom. Hopefully you'll be using these lectures for the majority of the course. That being said, it is the first video that I am doing, first lecture that I'm doing, so I do expect for it to be a little bit bumpy here at the outset, but I'm sure these will get better as I get more experienced at them. However, I think Samuel L. Jackson said it best in 1993's movie of the year, at least in my opinion, Jurassic Park.
Hold on to your butts.
The first topic of the day and of the year, at least in my government courses, is an introduction. You know, what is government? What's American government? What and all do they do? And I usually pose this question I'm getting ready to ask as the first question for the year. I don't start off with what is government and all that stuff, because you might not know. You have an idea, but you might not truly know. But you can at least answer this question. And it's more of just a thinking in your head question and picture it, not necessarily a write it down type thing. Before we get started though, you might be sitting and asking yourself, you know, it's the first day of the school year, I've just given you this video to go home and watch, you might just be watching on your own, and you might be thinking, I don't need government. It's stupid. It's a bunch of people arguing, I have no voice, I don't really vote for anybody, if you know about the electoral college system. It's all just bogus, they don't do anything for us anyways, yada yada yada, and I know there's some of you out there. But this question is still really important because it might not have been something you thought about a whole lot prior to this. And even if you have, it might make you think even more. So the question is this, as lame as it sounds, think about what your life would be like without government. Go ahead and think about it, have all the time in the world. Did it kind of look something like this?
Run! Go! Get to the chopper!
Okay, what I just showed you might be the worst possible scenario, or scenarios that would happen if there was no government, but rest assured, if you thought anything like chaos, it could be a pretty close estimate. If you think how many people that live in the country, let alone the world, and that there's nothing to at least rule over them, or at least establish some kind of law, it can get a little hairy. It might get a little hairy. Just think about what it's like, or what it was like the first time that your parents left you at the house by yourself, and what it was like to not have rules. It might get a little hairy. Maybe you've started grasping just how important government is. It's not just a bunch of lame old dudes sitting in a building wearing suits talking about boring stuff and stuff you don't understand, or a bunch of dead white dudes that did some stuff a long time ago and it doesn't seem important anymore. It's a little bit more than that, and believe it or not, it impacts you right now, whether you think about that kind of stuff or not, but it really does impact you. There's lots of different reasons you can come up with to see government in your life, for those of you that don't think that it's important to you or you don't feel its impact. Trust me when I say that it's there, okay? But first, we need to talk about what government is. Like I said, government's not a bunch of old dudes deciding what it is that you're going to be doing, although that's kind of part of it, okay? You might have several definitions out there, but realistically, government is kind of like a creation. It's an invention. We invented it. We didn't used to have it. We'll talk about that later. But we didn't used to have it. We kind of invented it. So really, it's a construct. It's a construction. And it's something that we made for ourselves to kind of give us guidelines, okay, to give us rules. You might know them as laws, okay? The technical term for that in the class, in the course, is what we would call public policy, okay? Something that the public wants, or something that the public needs. You might have heard the phrase, write your congressman, call your senator, sign a petition, stuff like that. Well, that's a way for you to kind of share your voice and get your voice out there. But really, that's you illustrating a need or a want, and hoping that public policy is made for it. Okay, public policy is for you, and that's what government does. It kind of helps frame them. It creates public policies for you guys. Okay, so you don't think that you're impacted by it, but like we said, and like we discovered earlier, you really truly are. Okay, so we've already got two big words: government and public policy. Okay, government being a construct that creates public policy, and of course, public policy being the actual law. Okay, the thing that you want to happen. Now you might be asking yourself, well, we constructed this. Where did it come from? Like, when did we construct this? When did we invent this? Well, think back to your world geography. Think back to some of your middle school classes with ancient history and a lot of those weird people out in the sand, and it might start ringing a little bit of a bell. Okay, hopefully you thought about this a little bit. Where did government come from? Okay, well, they certainly didn't call it this back when it was created, but I want you to think about the first thing you really truly start studying in world geography, not the landforms and stuff like that, but about the people and about the cultures, or maybe world history or the ancient history back from middle school even. And some of the first things you started learning about, and some things might start ringing a bell. Of course, you probably thought about ancient Egypt. You might have forgotten about Mesopotamia. But really and truly, you might have thought of the word early civilization, or words, I guess, technically, or civilization. Okay? And a civilization is just a group of people coming together and coexisting together.
Walk like an Egyptian.
Now imagine you're back in Egypt out in the sand. It's really hot. You can't really grow a whole lot. You have to be on the Nile River. And someone comes along and steals something from you. Okay? Now, before we had government, your solution might have been to just kill the person. Who knows? Okay? Whatever. But as more and more people started crowding together and living in confinement, this hadn't happened before. Small groups of people have been wandering around. They were nomads. They just traveled, went wherever the food was. Okay? And when they were out of food, they went to the next place. Well, now they're starting to all congregate in one area. Okay? And when you start doing that, when you start living close to people, situations arise. Okay? And eventually some people are like, hey, we need some laws. Okay? We're killing each other. We're chopping off hands and feet and arms and gouging out eyes, and it's bad. Okay? And we need some rules. And from that point on, throughout the rest of the known history, every single society, every single civilization, or anything of the sort has had some kind of code or laws or rules, whatever they want to call them, that they live by, because they have created, as a necessity to coexist with one another, some form of government. Okay, that's a little bit of historical basis for you. And later on, we'll go over kind of how government as a really early creation has kind of evolved over the years to what we kind of have now. So, we just talked about kind of the early beginnings of government, and now we're going to talk about kind of its power. How does it get its power? That's up for debate, but every single government that's ever existed and will ever exist, at least as speculation, has three kinds of very basic powers. Okay, legislative power, executive power, and the third one's judicial. Okay, and you might recognize those, saying, hey, the branches of government. Those are the names of our branches of government. Okay, well, as much as we like to think America is awesome, we didn't really pin those types of powers as much as we like to think that we probably did. We just took those powers and said, hey, they can just be our branches. Okay, that's just kind of how we formed our own government. Not everybody's like us. Doesn't mean they're bad, but every single government has those three kinds of powers: legislative, executive, and judicial. We're going to start with the first one, legislative. The legislative power. Okay, or our legislative branch, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The legislative power means that the government has the power to draft legislation or to make public policy. There's that word, public policy again. We heard that word earlier. We're going to keep hearing it. Public policy, we know them as laws, are the things that you guys want. And the legislative power of government, the first basic power, gives the government the right to make laws. And that's all well and good. Okay? But you might be thinking, well, they make the laws, I really don't care about them anyways. Well, that's where the second law comes into play. The executive power. Okay? Now, for us, that's the executive branch, that's the president, getting ahead of ourselves again, but the executive power of government basically says that now that you've made the law, it is now the government's job to execute that law, to enforce it, to make sure that it's done. Okay? Nowadays, that's the president signing it into law. You might have heard the term veto. That's when he says that nobody doesn't like it, he sends it back. When he signs the bill into law, it becomes a law. Okay? It's enacted. It's enforced. You're going to do it. Okay? And then the last one's the judicial power. Our judicial branch. Okay? And the judicial power decides if the law is okay. Basically, what they do is that they interpret it. Okay? The judicial branch interprets the law. They decide what it means. Okay? And you'll be asking yourself, well, stopping at a stop sign's pretty, cut and dry. Well, yeah, that's a very basic law. Okay? And even then it can get complex if you've ever sat in traffic court or served in a jury, which most of you have not yet, but you will at some point, and you'll see how they can start twisting that simple law to make it more complex. But anyways, I digress. But that's a basic law. Think about these monumental decisions that have to be made and these big, vague laws that encompass every single person, and they start getting complex. Okay? And it's open for interpretation. That's what the judicial power does. It interprets the law. What does it exactly mean? For us, that's the judicial branch. It's the legal system, the Supreme Court. They decide what the laws mean. If you've heard about Hobby Lobby, and the only reason I mention that now is because it's the most current thing happening right now. You might have heard a little bit about Supreme Court decisions and what exactly that means. Basically, they have taken the Constitution and decided what part of it means. They've interpreted it. So that's judicial power. Okay? So those are your three powers: legislative, executive, and judicial. And every single government has those powers. Okay? They're just enacted differently across all the governments that exist. Okay? All right. Real quickly, this is something we'll go over more in class, and it's something we can go in more depth with in class as well. But I do want to touch on the two basic forms of government. Okay? Two, at the most basic forms of government that we will experience or encounter today. The first one, a dictatorship. You've heard this term before. You might think of Adolf Hitler. Okay? Heil Hitler and all that stuff. The Nazis. World War II. And that's kind of the baseline or the go-to thought whenever you think of the word dictatorship. Okay? But a dictatorship means that just, generally speaking, one person's in charge. One person calls all the shots. It's very unlike what we have here. Okay? But a dictatorship is one person calling the shots. Okay? Unfortunately, dictatorships have a bad kind of reputation now because of people like Mussolini in World War II, Italy's dictator, and Adolf Hitler, North Korea, Fidel Castro, all those guys. Okay, they kind of gave it a bad name. But just because it's a dictatorship and one person's calling the shots doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad form of government. Okay, you need to open your minds a little bit. It doesn't mean it's a bad form of government. We just kind of associate it now with a bad form of government because of all those negative influences that have kind of assigned themselves to that form. Okay, and it is very unlike what we have here. Okay, you might know this, and I hope you do know this, but we have what's called a democracy. In particular, a representative democracy. Okay, but a democracy is completely different from a dictatorship. Okay, dictatorship, one person. Okay, always remember that. Dictator, one. Okay, democracy is what they call government by the people. Okay, basically the people have the power. Okay. Now, like you said, and like I said earlier, we have a representative democracy. You might be thinking we don't necessarily have a whole lot of power, and That's true, although you can join government later on in life and vote, okay? We have a representative democracy, okay? We elect representatives to represent us. So in a sense, we kind of have a voice. We just pick someone to be our voice. If we don't like them, we vote for someone else. That's why we have elections. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about this more in class. But your two basic forms of government, dictatorship and democracy. And lastly, for this video, this first groundbreaking video is going to be a somewhat difficult concept early on for you to kind of wrap your head around, just because of the way we use that term here in the United States. Okay? But I want you to think about the dominant political unit in the world that exists today. What will we call it? Okay? And that's kind of a weird question, especially if you don't know what I'm kind of looking for. But I'm looking for a political unit. Okay? A unit kind of like a being, an entity. Something that exists. Okay? It's kind of defined. And obviously, political, we're talking about government. We're talking about all kinds of things. Okay? Ruling and things of that nature. Okay? But it's a weird question, especially if you don't know what I'm looking for. Okay? And some of you might have thought country and nation. Okay? Well, that's the term we kind of use here, and they use elsewhere too. Okay? But that's not the technical definition. Okay? The technical definition is called a state. Now, you might be thinking, hey, we have states, we have 50 of them. Okay? That's great and good. Okay? And you're going to see why we call them states when I talk about what a state is later on. But truthfully, in the grand scheme of things, a state is a political unit. It's the dominant political unit today. Okay? They're called states. We call them countries and nations. They're really called states. That's going to be something you need to wrap your head around. Okay? The dominant political unit today is a state. And they have four characteristics. Number one, population. Okay? They have to have people living in the state, or else it's really not, a state. Okay? Nobody lives there. What do you got? Okay? But it's more than that. It's more than just people living inside a specific area. The people have to have kind of the same culture. Okay? They have to kind of have the same beliefs, or at least close to it. The same kind of experiences. And for the United States, you can really see that. People are born, they go to school, they go to work. Predominant religion is Christianity. Predominant race is white or Caucasian, although that's starting to change. But you kind of see it. Okay, we kind of have a culture. Fast food nation, sports, all that kind of stuff. We know this. Okay, so population is more than just people. It's also the culture that lives within it. Okay, but that's just one thing. Population. Number two, a territory. Okay, it has to have a territory. It has to have a boundary. Okay, it has to have a specified area. I'm making a circle or an oval or some really misshapen thing that it looks like there, but it has to have a territory. It has to have a specific boundary. Okay, now our states have that. South Carolina, Georgia. You go across the river and you're in Georgia, and it says, "Welcome to Georgia. We're glad it's on your mind." You go across the river again, you're back in South Carolina. That's the natural boundary for our states. Okay, but think about the United States. We share a border with Mexico and with Canada. Okay, so it's twofold. Okay, so the differences between our states and the state as the dominant political unit are still kind of blurred. Okay, but here's where it starts separating. Okay, sovereignty. That's the word called sovereignty. I like this word. I use this word a lot. It's a word you need to know, so I'm going to keep repeating it. Sovereignty, which means basically all-powerful. Okay? This unit controls itself. Okay? It doesn't answer to anybody else. Okay? It basically just reports to them and them alone. Okay? And if you think about our state, South Carolina isn't its own country. Okay? It's a state. It answers to the United States. Okay, it's one of the 50 states in the United States of America. Okay, so it's not completely sovereign. Okay, as South Carolinians, we answer to South Carolina as a state. But we also answer to the United States as well. So therein lies the rub, so to speak. Okay, we're not completely all powerful, but the United States doesn't answer to anybody else except for the United States of America. Nobody else controls it. You might have heard about United States territories like Puerto Rico and things of that nature. Okay, there are territories. Yes, they have their own government. Okay, they're not sovereign states, and that's the difference. The United States is a sovereign state, comprised of 50 states. Okay, so that's the third characteristic: sovereignty. We have population number 1, territory number 2, and sovereignty number 3, and the last one is government. Okay, this political unit has to have some kind of framework to make and enforce and interpret legislation, to interpret public policy. Okay, there has to be some kind of rule. There have to be some kind of laws. Okay, that people need to be held to a certain kind of standard. And that's really the fourth characteristic. Okay, and South Carolina has that, but so does the United States. Okay, and that's why it's kind of weird. Okay, this whole me calling it a political unit, a state, and that's the technical term for it, is going to take a long time to get used to. And I'm going to use it in class several times. And I'm not talking about South Carolina. When I talk about South Carolina, I will address it as South Carolina. But when I talk about a state, unless I'm talking about our 50 states, I'm talking about the political unit that exists today, the dominant form of it. And there are several others, but really we're just more interested in the dominant form. Alright guys, that does it for the day. Hope you enjoyed the video. The next one of the series will go in more in depth than what we talked about this time. Please go back and review these terms. Go back and watch this again. Don't just don't be a one and done kind of thing. Anyways, I hope you learned a lot. Please ask questions in class whenever we get around to them. And stay tuned for the next one. See ya.